This is Hope for Your Pelvic Floor, the podcast where we stop managing women's symptoms and start making sense of their bodies. I'm Claire Sparrow, Pilates educator, pelvic health specialist, and best-selling author. And here we talk honestly about what women are told, what the evidence actually says, and how real change happens. Welcome to another episode. It is great to be here and speak with you. I am recording from sort of sunny Scotland today. I do still have my little lights here because it's not that sunny, but I've been blessed to have some nice weather and some amazing long walks here. And one of the things that we've done while we've been here in Scotland is we've been watching the Winter Olympics. Has anybody else been slightly hooked on some of these amazing athletes and just in awe of the athleticism and the capacity and the resilience? It's really extraordinary. So we've been dipping in and out of that between our walks and my cold water swims and all of that family holiday fun. And it really got me thinking of a topic I thought would be useful to share with all of you today. And I was thinking when I watched all the different sports and saw the different athletes, just about the years of training and the specificity around that specific training. You know, you can notice that you can see just from how their physique is and how they conduct themselves, how they move, their posture, the actual sport that they do. You know, you can just look at someone and tell, you know, their bodies have evolved and grown and developed and formed based on the training that they've been doing for decades, most likely. And they don't just get stronger in an isolated way. They're literally training their entire body, their nervous system, like absolutely everything about them is specific to whatever their event is. So there isn't an Olympic coach out there saying, just generally go out and squeeze and tense everything and hope for the best. And that's the bit I want you to really think about today as we have a conversation about specificity, about training for a specific event. You know, I'm kind of joking a little bit talking about the Olympics because it's what's on my mind. We're all kind of seeing this incredible Olympics. But actually, when you start to break it down and think about it, really, what they're doing makes a lot of sense. And yes, I'm not asking you to go and train to be, you know, in the Olympics. What I'm thinking more about is encouraging us to train more specifically for what our pelvic floor needs are, for what our events are, whatever that might be for you. And in contrast to what most women are being told, which is just to squeeze and strengthen your pelvic floor, to hold it up for a length of time, to do rapid squeezes. You might get those two things if you're lucky, but it's not specific like the Olympic coach. The Olympic coach is not giving you that generic just squeeze and hope. They're training every nuanced detail of what is required for whatever that specific sport is. And, you know, oh gosh, I feel like a bit of a broken record because I have talked at length and I will continue to about why we're told to squeeze and the fact that we're told the muscles are weak and therefore we just need to strengthen that particular muscle. But it isn't as straightforward as that. What is it that you're specific, you listening right now, what is it your pelvic floor is needed for? And it can vary for all of us what we specifically need our pelvic floor for. I told you recently in an episode I've started to go snowboarding again with my middle one. And so I'm thinking, okay, this requires something different of my pelvic floor than the general activities that I already do in my life. What is it that your pelvic floor is needed for in your life? Let's get curious about that. When you question what your pelvic floor is needed for in your life, it then begs the question, why would we all then just do generic clenching and squeezing? Because what we all need is going to be something a little bit different. We get told, your pelvic floor is weak. Weak in comparison to what? And weak for what activity? Like, what's the event? What's your Olympics? What's your task? Weak in isolation. So is it just weak when you have to think about squeezing it and nothing else being involved? Or is it weak in coordination with your whole body? It's way more complicated than your pelvic floor is weak. The pelvic floor is most definitely not entering the squeezing Olympics. So why would we be training it in that way for some imaginary event that squeezing would train it for? I mean, it's just ludicrous. And what I'd like us to do today is break it down a little bit. Think about this as a little kind of lesson in your specific pelvic floor needs. Because what does your pelvic floor actually need to do? And I'm going to take that as a broad question and give you some examples. And then for you, maybe I'm going to suggest something that is specific to you, or maybe you'll have a separate answer for yourself. What are the events in our lives? What is it that your pelvic floor is needed for? It's the everyday events, getting out of bed. And you might think, gosh, am I needing my pelvic floor for that? There are many women that I have worked with where just the act of getting out of bed feels like a strain on their pelvic floor. So yes, getting out of bed is an event for your pelvic floor. And then there's other things that are maybe more obvious things like lifting a child. Maybe you've got a toddler or you're a granny who all of a sudden has a grandchild there to be picking and carrying all the time. Maybe it's jumping. Maybe it's coughing, that dreaded cough, the winter cough that many of us have suffered. The fear of that. Does that resonate with you? Is that where you need your pelvic floor? Perhaps it's running. Are you embarking on the Couch to 5K, or are you maintaining a regular running practice? Perhaps it's carrying shopping bags, or pushing the dreaded trolley. That one really resonates with me. I used to get pain and that feeling of the pressure and the way that the trolley always seemed to have a life of its own. So I couldn't anticipate and coordinate. It was, yes, that brings shudders. So maybe that's one of the things for you that's an event you need your pelvic floor for. Or walking, maybe uphill walking or downhill walking for that matter. Turning over in bed. So we talked about getting out of bed. Turning over in bed is also a real life event that needs your pelvic floor. And then the uncontrollable laughing. When you're out with the girls and you're just having total hysterics about something, is that the event? Is that what you need to train your pelvic floor for? This list, and I could go on, but this list, this is the real Olympics for your pelvic floor. This is what you need to train your pelvic floor for. And does squeezing it look like any of those events? Obviously not. Pelvic floor needs timing. It needs the coordination with your brain to know how much, how little, how much length. It's not as simple as just squeeze. It needs that spontaneity and responsiveness for the hysterical laughter. It needs elasticity. You need to lengthen to be able to spring up and jump. It needs that all-important relationship Can you finish my sentence? With the breath. I'm sure an episode doesn't go by when I don't rant on about the breath as well, but you know it. You know your pelvic floor needs to have a positive relationship with your breath. And not to mention your ribs, the basket of your ribs moving freely to allow for more breath. They work in this beautiful symbiotic relationship. And then, of course, there's your feet and your hips. If your feet are not flexible, mobile, and strong, that has a bearing on your pelvic floor. The same with your hips. So if you haven't got lots of movement around your hips, then your pelvic floor is not getting told to move. I could go on, but what I want you to understand from this is that when you're training your pelvic floor, we need to train all of these different components to support you in your real life events. All right. Are you still with me? This is getting more into a rant than I anticipated. But anyway, we are where we are. I do want to give you a really tangible example. And I can't remember, it was a recent episode. I talked to you about making the bed. That is definitely one of our Olympic events, the unglamorous event, making the bed. What I want to do is actually break the components of making the bed down so that you can see how many elements there are, not just pelvic floor strength, but how many elements there are in the activity of making the bed. Because, you know, like an athlete, a skier, for example, they're going to train balance and edge control, leg strength, coordination. Maybe a figure skater's another example. They train to spin under control, landing. Golly, I watched them in absolute awe. I cannot fathom how they can land the way they do, but it's because they train for it. And they also probably have a little bit of rhythm training. But these are all components, and these are the things that we need to consider with something like making the bed. What happens before? What happens during? What happens after the event? This is all the kind of questions that we need to ask. And I've asked those questions in relation to making the bed. I feel like I could do a Pilates class to teach you all the skills required in your body to make the bed. This is literally what I felt like as I was breaking it down and listing out to share with you all the different components of making the bed. You've got walking around the bed. So if you've got a super king size bed, you're covering some distance as you walk round. Not to mention the fact that you have to reach forward repeatedly. And I mean reach, especially if it's a super king size bed where well, for me it is because I'm only little. It's a big old distance to reach. That lifting the mattress corner, the tucking in, that lift. I mean, I feel that as I say it to you now. I can feel the strategy in my body that's required to lift that heaping great mattress corner up just to tuck the sheet in. And then you're holding it up while you're stuffing in to the corner. All that leaning movements, the twisting movements, the awkward stretches and positions. And I mentioned it in the episode about the duvet before, that shaking that heavy duvet. Then you've got the ability to lift your arms over your head. Can you do that? Can you lift your arms over your head? The quick reactive movements that you might need if the duvet falls or you lose the pillow or there's quick responsive movements required. Maybe you end up holding your breath without even realizing, just to seem as if it's helping you to support this activity that you're doing. Managing the heavy weight of the duvet whilst it's far away from you as you square off the corners. I could go on, but what you can see is that our Olympic event of making the bed really truly involves a lot of different movements that all have an impact on your pelvic floor. So if one of those movements isn't working efficiently, then it could create a compromise on your pelvic floor. And I just ask you, where exactly in all of those movements does it look like or sound like squeezing your pelvic floor? If making the bed were the Olympics, which it does sometimes feel like, what would we train? What are the exercises, the sorts of movements we need to train so that our pelvic floor works spontaneously and efficiently as part of our whole body team where it's not compromised? What would we do? Obviously, I'm going to answer that and give you some examples so that you could go away now and have a play at home with some movements that will help you with this activity. Maybe it's not this activity. At the beginning, I went through some of the events of our life for you to consider what it is for you. Maybe I listed what you have as an event in your life, or maybe you thought of something else. So once I give you these examples, you can apply this system to whatever your event is. Maybe some of the things are the same. So what you would need to train in your body for the Olympic event of making the bed would be improving your shoulder mobility. So the ability to bring your arms over your head specifically before then loading it with the duvet. So can you lift your arms up over your head without it hurting, without it feeling sticky and jammy around the front of your shoulders and your collarbones, without arching your back for miles? That would be where I would begin, being able to move your arm over your head. And then I would look at rib cage expansion, the movement of your breath. Remember, we talked about the basket of your ribs and how flexible they are, and the breath into there will really, really help you with the movement over your head, with the stamina of managing that beast of the duvet. Also, I would work on the bend at the hip. So the ability to, maybe you call it hinge or flex, like a squat movement, so that when you're bending and reaching over the bed, you're not doing it kind of craning from your back. You can do it from your hips as well as from your back. I'd also look at the movement of your spine, the kind of twisting movements. And my trick is to put the toilet roll on the cistern behind you so that every time you go, you have to twist your spine. That might be a really simple way for you to build up that movement of rotation for all the weird kind of positions that you get into. Then I would explore things maybe with a TheraBand or very light weights, or even just the cord from your dressing gown, to work on how you experience something coming in, some load, some information, push-pull through your hands. How does that feedback of shaking, holding first and shaking the duvet, how does that transfer into your pelvic floor? So practicing it with something that doesn't weigh the amount that a duvet does, like a TheraBand, like a dressing gown cord, something like that. Also from your feet up as well. So what about the way that your feet are meeting the ground? Are you flopping about in, we call them baffies in Scotland, in your baffies, which are your slippers or your house shoes? Are you flopping around, or have you got some really good connection with the floor through your feet? What about balance? I think, hands down, ladies, we all need to work on our balance. A week doesn't go by without people saying to me, "Oh, my balance is terrible. Oh, my balance is getting so much worse." I used to be really good at balance. Honestly, we need to be working on our balance. Stand on one leg. I do this with the toothbrush. I have an electric toothbrush. And it kind of does a pause after 30 seconds. So you change to a different area of your mouth, whatever. And so for 30 seconds, I stand on one leg. For when it changes, 30 seconds on the other leg. And I do 2 sets of that. And then I've done 2 minutes of brushing my teeth and I've stood on one leg twice, basically. So balance is hugely important for loads of reasons as women. But particularly if we're training for that event of doing the duvet, we're leaning, we're reaching, we're doing all of these off-center activities. So training your balance is important. And what about the length of your pelvic floor and its responsiveness, this kind of feeling that it can recoil like an elastic band, because it needs that for the shaking out of the duvet. It needs to be able to do it really quickly as you're shaking. It needs to be able to respond to that. So when in life are you doing an exercise that trains you for that? It's really big when you start to break it down and think about it. None of these examples are gripping, or it's all about timing and responsiveness and all the different components. But we're not really looking at the pelvic floor in an isolated way. It's everything. It's how everything works in support of the pelvic floor. It's how we are a team. Your body is a team. This is really important. When you shake out that duvet, your pelvic floor doesn't need to clamp down for 2 minutes, does it? It needs to respond to the pressure, then release, then respond, then release. It needs that elasticity and spontaneity. Quite a lot to think about, isn't it? Imagine if we just trained for the activities we actually do. That would be huge. It would make such a big difference, not just to your pelvic health, but your overall health and well-being. I've often talked in the past about planks. What is a plank training you for? Honestly, let's do things that actually train for what we need. If you were doing, I can't even remember what it's called now, the thing where they shoot down. There are Olympic events where, yes, planking might be useful, but ladies, I don't think any of us are competing in any activities or events that need us to plank. There's many, many more things that we can do